Just throw them in. They're already dying. That's what the man said before he kicked the crate into the pit. 3 German Shepherd puppies, barely 8 weeks old, hit the bottom of the drainage ditch with a wet, splattering thud. Their tiny bodies tangled in greasy rope, soaked head to tail in thick, used motor oil. One tried to lift its head and failed. Another let out a sound that wasn't even a cry, just a rasping gasp too soft for the world above to care. No one stopped the man. No one asked questions. The site was abandoned, forgotten, and the pups were meant to be forgotten too. But fate didn't follow orders that day. A maintenance worker named Elias Vega had been dispatched to check an overflow grate just 50 feet from the dumping site. He wasn't supposed to be near that pit. He was behind schedule, tired, but as he passed, he heard it. A muffled yelp, weak, dying, but unmistakably alive. He thought it was a bird at first, or maybe a raccoon stuck in the runoff. When he stepped closer and looked down into the shallow ditch, he saw them. 3 black and sable pups, barely moving. One of them blinked. Elias jumped into the pit. He didn't think about oil. He didn't think about the stains or the smell. He took off his hoodie, wrapped all 3 pups as best he could, and scrambled back up the muddy wall, yelling for help before he even reached his truck. The rescue report listed it as accidental discovery, but nothing about what Elias found. That day felt like an accident. At Briar Hollow Veterinary Hospital, Dr. Layla Chen had seen abuse cases before, but nothing like this. The first pup she unwrapped wasn't even breathing until she tilted its head and cleared the oil from its mouth. The second was convulsing. The third, the smallest, wasn't crying, but was still alive. All of them reeked of diesel and cold steel. The rope burns around their legs suggested they hadn't just been dumped. They'd been tied down, on purpose. Layla worked fast. Her team flushed oil from their eyes, their lungs, their fur. They clipped away mats, administered IVs, took turns holding them upright through the night. Every breath was a coin flip. Every hour without organ failure felt like a small miracle. Then, just before sunrise, the hospital door swung open. A man stepped in, tall, weather-beaten, boots caked in dust, military-issued duffel still slung over his shoulder. His name was Sergeant Cole Ramsey. He didn't say much at first, just asked to see the dogs. Layla, still in scrubs and exhaustion, led him back in silence. The moment Cole stepped into the room, one of the pups, barely conscious, twitched. Cole froze. His breath caught. No, he fell to his knees. This one, her name is Scout, he whispered. I named her. Layla looked up. You know them. They're mine, he said. They were born at the base kennel 2 months before I rotated out. Their mother, Naira, was my canine partner for 5 years. She died in the field. I was supposed to bring the pups home. His hands trembled as he reached for the weakest one, Scout. She was barely breathing, but when his fingers brushed her cheek, she let out a faint, warbled sound and pressed into his palm. Cole broke. I thought they were safe, he whispered. I filed the transfer. I arranged the transport. I trusted the system. Layla didn't ask who failed. She didn't need to. The evidence was lying right in front of them, struggling to stay alive under warm blankets and monitored beeping. These pups were meant to serve, Cole said, eyes locked on the smallest one. Not end up like this. Layla's voice was steady. Then let's make sure they still get that chance. And in that moment, amid the hum of IV pumps, the smell of antiseptic barely masking the oil, and the tear-streaked face of a soldier who thought he'd lost everything, the story of 3 abandoned pups was rewritten, not as victims, but as survivors, and it was only the beginning. For 2 nights, Sergeant Cole Ramsey never left the hospital. He didn't care about the stares from staff, the questioning glances from visitors, or even the ache in his back from sleeping upright in a plastic chair. What mattered was what lay behind the glass of the critical care unit, 3 puppies fighting to live, each one carrying a piece of a promise he hadn't been able to keep. Every time Scout let out a shallow breath or stirred in her sleep, Cole leaned forward, murmuring her name like a prayer. Each syllable carried weight. Each whisper was an apology. Dr. Layla Chen watched quietly from the hallway, arms folded, trying to make sense of the way the soldier had arrived right when the pups needed him most. It wasn't just luck. It was something heavier, unfinished business that had found its way back to him through the most brutal of paths. Every time she entered the room to check vitals, Cole asked questions with military precision. Temperature, heart rate, oxygen levels. But then, the moment she stepped out, he softened. petting their heads, gently humming an old lullaby Naira used to calm them with, the one he hadn't sung since the day she died. On the morning of the third day, Layla delivered the news he had been dreading and praying for all at once. "They're stable," she said, "but barely. The smallest one, Scout, she's still on the edge. Her lungs are struggling. She's responding to your voice, though. That's not nothing." Cole nodded. "She remembers. They all do. Dogs don't forget who makes them feel safe." Layla hesitated before adding, "We also found metal shavings in their fur, traces of rust. It wasn't just oil. Someone dumped them near machinery, maybe inside a scrapyard before the ditch. Whoever did this didn't want them found." Cole didn't speak, but the fire that lit in his eyes was unmistakable. Later that day, Layla returned from her office with news she hadn't wanted to share but could no longer withhold. The animal control report had been updated. No leads, no witnesses. The footage from nearby traffic cameras was too grainy. The crate had no tags, no microchip, no records. It was like someone had deliberately made sure these pups vanished from every system. "You were right," she told him. "The paperwork was falsified. The transport never arrived at your family's address. Somewhere along the way they were taken off the route, rerouted, and dumped." Cole stood silent in the center of the room, hands clenched. Then, for the first time since arriving, he pulled something out of his duffel bag, a laminated photo. It showed Naira sitting proud in her tactical vest, 3 newborn pups tucked close to her side inside a kennel. One of them, Scout, had a paw resting on her mother's nose. Cole handed it to Layla wordlessly and returned to the chair beside the incubator. He placed one hand on the glass. "They were supposed to wear the vest one day, all 3. I told Naira I'd see to it." Layla didn't answer. She just let him speak. That night, the first miracle arrived in the form of a tail. The largest of the pups, the one Cole had named Echo, lifted his head and thumped his tail once against the blanket. Then again, he opened one swollen eye and let out a raspy yip. It wasn't strong, but it was sound, voluntary, clear, alive. Cole dropped to his knees beside the incubator, overwhelmed. Layla rushed in with the tech team and quickly assessed him. Pup number 2, Valor, was close behind, twitching, shifting, his breathing now less labored. But Scout wasn't waking up. They moved her into Cole's arms, carefully, gently. Layla gave permission for a short, monitored cuddle. "Let her smell you," she said. "Let her remember what home felt like." Cole sat cross-legged on the floor with her wrapped in a blanket, so tiny in his hands she barely filled his lap. He didn't speak at first, just let her heart press against his chest. Then slowly he began to hum, the same rhythm, the same tune, the one Naira had always used, the one he hadn't realized had been buried in him until he'd watched Baron respond to it once after a traumatic mission overseas. Scout didn't stir for minutes, then her paw twitched. She let out a breath so soft, Layla almost didn't catch it on the monitor. Then her ear flicked. Cole closed his eyes and pressed his forehead to hers. "You're here," he whispered, "and I'm not letting go this time." From that moment on, her numbers improved. The next day, all 3 pups ate on their own. By the end of the week, they were up, wobbly, staggering, but on their feet. Cole never left their side. Not when the press arrived. Not when military officials called to ask how he'd found them. Not even when an anonymous letter showed up at the clinic with no return address, no explanation, just a typed line that read, "You weren't supposed to find them." Layla didn't show him the letter until much later. For now, all that mattered was the way 3 nearly dead puppies leaned into the chest of the soldier who hadn't saved them with weapons or orders, but with memory, presence, and a promise never broken. And in that quiet recovery room lit by sunrise, the smallest one, Scout, licked his chin, and the man who'd spent years in combat finally let the tears fall without shame. Scout's recovery was slow, but she was trying, and that, for Cole, was everything. While Echo and Valor began to wobble around the pen in clumsy little circles, knocking over water bowls and chewing on the corners of their blankets, Scout stayed close to Cole's side. She could barely stand at first, but she responded to his touch. She'd bury her head into his chest when he spoke to her and press her nose into his wrist like she was confirming, again and again, that he was real. She didn't bark. She didn't whimper. She just watched him, soaking in the steady comfort of someone who had once belonged to her world and hadn't vanished. Layla documented every milestone in a quiet haze of amazement. She'd never seen trauma resolve this way before. No textbook protocol, no strict medication schedule, just the undeniable power of reunion. She knew the science, but even she couldn't explain how these pups had come back from the brink so quickly. It wasn't just survival. It was soul-deep memory, waking up in the presence of someone who had loved them before they knew pain. But not everything around them was healing. 3 days after the pups began walking again, Layla received a visit she didn't expect. A man in a gray blazer stepped into the clinic. He wasn't from animal control or law enforcement. He introduced himself as Raymond Bell, a private compliance consultant for a military-adjacent contractor. Layla didn't like the tone. Polished, cold, too interested in paperwork and not enough in life. He glanced at the case files, then at the kennels where the pups were sleeping. "These dogs," he said, "were supposed to be in our facility. They were flagged for assessment and future deployment. Somehow they went missing." Layla crossed her arms. "They didn't go missing. They were dumped in an oil pit and left for dead." Raymond barely blinked. "Which is exactly why they shouldn't be in civilian custody. They are government property, not rescues. I'll be arranging their transfer within the next 48 hours. Cole wasn't there at the time. He had stepped out for a brief moment, for the first time in over a week, to grab clean clothes and check in with his father. Layla didn't have time to warn him before the man left a copy of the transfer notice on her desk. The heading read, "Reclamation Order," stamped with a seal Cole would recognize instantly. A retired military logistics unit known for processing assets deemed unfit or unnecessary. When Cole returned, Layla handed him the document without a word. He read it, once then again, then crumpled it in his fist. "They were going to terminate the entire litter," he said flatly. "That's what this means. Somewhere in the system, someone decided they weren't worth the time to train. Too young, too traumatized, not cost-effective." Layla's stomach turned. "That means the dumping wasn't an accident. It means it was sanctioned." Cole didn't yell. He didn't curse. He sat down beside the kennel and reached through the bars to touch Scout's paw, like he was grounding himself before the weight of his own fury crushed him. The pups, sensing his stillness, quieted too. All three huddled close, watching him. "I don't care who stamped this order," he said. "They're not taking them." Layla leaned against the door. "If they come back, I don't know if I can legally stop them, but I can slow them down." She paused. "We need proof, a name, someone who rerouted those pups, someone who knows the difference between an error and a cover-up." That night, Cole made a call, not to a commander or a lawyer, but to a corporal named Jace, who had worked kennel duty during Cole's deployment. Jace owed him a favor, more than one, actually. And when Cole asked if he could check the facility logs, Jace didn't hesitate. 12 hours later, Cole had a name. A civilian contractor, temporary clearance. Filed the transfer, logged the transport, and erased the entry 2 hours after the puppies left the base. The man's name didn't matter to Cole as much as what it meant. This wasn't just bureaucracy, it was betrayal. Someone had looked at a litter of pups born from one of the finest canines the service had known and decided they weren't worth even a drop of decency. So they'd wrapped them in rope, covered them in waste, and tossed them out like broken gear. Layla scanned the printout. "This is enough. I'll go to the media if I have to. No one's burying this." But Cole wasn't looking at the files anymore. He was looking at Scout. She was standing, not perfectly, not strong, but on her own, wobbling toward the food bowl with every ounce of determination in her little frame. Layla followed his gaze. "You realize what they are, right?" Cole nodded. "Fighters." "No," she said gently. "Symbols." Outside the hospital, protesters had started gathering. Not the angry kind, just quiet supporters holding signs that said they deserve better and from service to shelter, stop the dumping. Someone had taken a screenshot of Cole cradling Scout and turned it into a post that now had over 1 million views. The military hadn't responded yet, but the world had. Back inside, Cole opened the kennel and let all 3 pups into his lap. Echo curled up instantly. Valor planted himself across Cole's foot like he was guarding the entire building. Scout sat upright, chest puffed out, tail twitching. "She's got her mother's spine," Cole whispered. Layla crouched beside him. "Do you still want to train them?" He thought for a long moment. "No," he said softly. "I want them to choose, whether that's a farm, a family, or the field. But this time, no one decides for them." And as the rain fell softly outside, and the pups fell asleep in a pile around his legs, Cole closed his eyes and knew one thing with absolute certainty. These dogs were never just part of the mission. They were the reason he came home. The official arrived at noon. No warning. No call. Just the hum of a black SUV rolling up outside Briar Hollow Veterinary Hospital, polished tires crushing gravel like it had something to prove. 2 men stepped out, one in uniform, the other in a tailored gray suit, the same compliance consultant who had dropped the reclamation order days earlier. His face was expressionless, but his presence? That was loud. Layla was already waiting in the front lobby. She had printed copies of every medical report, every video, every updated status file on Scout, Echo, and Valor. If they came with questions, she had answers. But they didn't come to ask, they came to take. "We're here for the dogs," the suited man said. She didn't flinch. "They're not ready for transport." The man's eyes didn't blink. "They've been deemed non-operational. They were never formally transferred to civilian care. We're authorized to retrieve and reprocess." Layla stared. "You mean destroy?" He didn't deny it. "They're no longer mission assets." That was when Cole stepped through the door behind her. His jaw was tight, but his voice was steady. "Then the mission is wrong." The room fell still. The officer in uniform looked uneasy now. He wasn't a monster, just a man following orders, and what he saw didn't match what he'd been briefed on. He looked past Layla, into the viewing window where the 3 pups were curled together in a sleeping pile, Scout lying across Echo's neck, Valor snoring, softly with one paw in the food bowl. "They were discarded," Cole said quietly, "but they weren't broken, not even close. You're looking at survivors, and if you think I'm letting you take them now, after everything they've been through, then you've forgotten what it means to serve." The suited man took a step forward. "Sergeant Ramsey, this is above your authority." "Not when it's personal," Cole replied. And then he pulled out a folder, one Layla hadn't seen before. Inside were notarized affidavits, transfer, logs, and a final statement signed by Jace, the corporal who had helped uncover the truth. It documented the unauthorized reroute, the skipped facility protocol, the falsified transport, and the missing chain of custody file that made everything. "These men were standing on invalid." "I suggest you read it," Cole said, handing it over. "Because if you don't leave on your own, you'll be escorted out on camera. And I guarantee this time, the public will know who gave the order." The uniformed officer took the file, opened it, and scanned it quickly. His face paled slightly. He nodded once, then turned and walked toward the exit. The man in the suit hesitated but followed. Layla didn't speak until the sound of the SUV's engine faded down the road. Then, she looked at Cole. "You were ready." "I had to be." That night the clinic was quiet again. No crowds, no flashing headlines, just peace. Cole sat in the corner of the recovery room, Scout curled in his lap, Echo at his feet, Valor snuggled into his side like he was trying to disappear beneath the fabric of Cole's uniform. There was no press release, no big announcement. But something had shifted. They were safe. And for the first time since Naira's death, Cole felt like something had been restored. Not duty, not reputation, but a promise, a silent one, made long ago between man and dog, that when the world failed them, someone still wouldn't. Months passed. The frost lifted from the edge of the fields. Wildflowers began blooming along the trails behind the veterinary clinic. Inside a quiet home just beyond the trees, 3 German shepherds, no longer pups, not yet full-grown, took their first steps into a new kind of life. Scout, the smallest, had grown into a watchful, fiercely loyal shadow. She followed Cole everywhere, through the kitchen, into the garage, out along the trail at dawn, her eyes always fixed on him like she still wasn't entirely convinced he wouldn't vanish. Echo became the mischief maker, always darting ahead, always turning to make sure everyone was close behind. And Valor, true to his name, was calm and deliberate, the last to run, the first to comfort. When storms rolled in, and Scout shivered, it was Valor who pressed his body beside hers. When Echo barked at shadows, it was Valor who touched his nose to her side and reminded her the world was safe now. They didn't need leashes anymore. They knew home. They knew Cole. And they remembered everything. The town hadn't forgotten them either. Cole never meant for their story to become a headline, but it did. And once the public knew what had happened to the litter of Naira, the legendary military K9 who gave her life in the field, they rallied. Donations came in. A foundation was created, led by Layla, and funded in part by veterans who knew what it felt like to be discarded. The goal was simple: no more dumped dogs. No more lost warriors. Every animal trained in service would have the right to live out their life with dignity, and if possible, with the humans who trained them. Cole declined every interview. He didn't need the attention. What he needed was time. Some mornings, he'd sit on the porch with a coffee cup in one hand and Scout resting against his leg, watching the sunrise. He'd think about Naira. He could still feel the weight of her collar in his palm, still hear the way she'd breathe against the side of his boot during night watch. One morning, as the fog drifted between the trees, a letter arrived. Official, letterhead. The seal of the same department that once tried to erase Scout and her brothers. Cole opened it slowly. Inside was a single-page commendation. Not for him, for Naira. Posthumous recognition for valor and sacrifice in the field. Alongside it, a formal adoption certificate for Scout, Echo, and Valor. Approved and finalized. They were no longer assets. They were family. Cole stared at the paper for a long while, then stood, walked to the small wooden box where Naira's collar was kept, and opened it. He reached down and gently added the certificate inside. Then he whispered, "They're safe now." Later that week, Cole took the dogs on a trip. Not to the base, not to a city, but to the last place Naira had served, the clearing where the team had camped just days before that final mission. It was quiet now, peaceful, overgrown with grass and humming with life. He set 3 small tags in the ground, each one bearing a name: Scout, Echo, Valor. He didn't need a monument. He just needed a reminder that beginnings could rise from endings, and that survival wasn't just about living, it was about being seen. As he turned to leave, all 3 dogs walked beside him. No command, no hesitation. They chose him again, and that choice meant everything.